Very good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all the dear participants. Hope you're all safe and in good health. Today, School of English, Kumalaguru College of Liberal Arts and Science expresses a wholehearted welcome to all the participants for joining today's session on the integration of employability skills into English program. Talking about Kumalaguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, it's a new venture and the youngest institution born out of the rich legacy of Shakti Group of companies started. And this college was started in the year 2018, focusing on liberal education, holistic education fostered to encourage creativity and independent thinking. So now it's functioning with 10 departments, nearly 856 students, and more than 50 faculty members. School of English offers a bachelor's degree in English literature, a course which is affiliated to Bharatiya University, upholding the vision to instill a love for literature and language and inspire learners to create, critique, communicate ideas, and emerge into socially aware, complete individuals. It offers a plethora of opportunities to learn innovative aspects of language and literature. The teaching learning is made interesting with interactive seminars and discussions such as critiquing, Socratic dialogues, reviews, etc. So eminent writers, journalists, eminent academicians are invited to thoughtful discourse on various topics related to language and literature. Hands-on training is also given to the learners on trending topics like storytelling, content writing, poetry writing, etc. So, as a part of that, today we have with us Dr.Ben Knight as an expert for this session. Uh, Speaking about Dr. Knight, he is the Director for Language and Pedagogy Research at Cambridge University Press, University of Cambridge, United Kingdom. He leads on using high quality academic research to develop more effective materials and resources. So, with his expertise in curriculum development and pedagogical research, he helps to underpin Cambridge's educational research resources with research based insights and conceptual models. So, since 2016, he has driven forward the development of the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework, which has formed a foundation for its approach to developing employability skills. And he has worked on educational reform projects in countries from Mexico to Japan and is particularly focusing on integrating the different components of education British Council in various countries around the world. So when I was talking to him about visiting India, he was telling he has visited various countries like Kenya, India, Sri Lanka, Japan, Italy, and UK. And for a number of years, he specialized in assessment, developing new exams at Cambridge Assessment, and managing vocational qualifications at City and Guilds. And now combines his expertise in assessment and learning to provide a holistic and evidence-based approach to education. So I am sure the expertise of Dr. Knight will help us to know how to integrate employability skills into an English language program, which is very much needed in this point of time. Without much ado, I welcome Dr. Knight to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Radhika, for that very kind invitation and introduction. And thank you to Kumaraguru College for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. I'll just explain that I work for Cambridge University Press and we publish books. But one of the things we particularly publish are materials for people to teach and learn English. And my role is I work with a team of researchers to understand how people learn English so that we can improve the design of the learning materials, the course books and textbooks. So that's what I do. Now, today I want to talk about employability skills in an English language program. And I got some slides here. I wonder if someone need to make the slides larger? Yeah, that's it. Perfect. Okay, so let me just turn the next slide. So the question I want to ask you is, what do you do? How do you help your students to become more employable? They go to university and they want to get a job, they want to have a career, and how are you helping them with that? Now, it might be, you might say that the way you help them become employable is that you help them get a qualification. And that you help them with that because you help them register, you help them, you give them a curriculum of things to learn, you help them learn, you assess them, you help them graduate, you help them to get the qualification, and that qualification helps them to get a job, to make them employable. So that's what you do. But you might say that it's not just about the qualification, it's about the people and their skills, your students' skills, and that what you want to do is to be able to develop the skills that they will need to impress employers and achieve their career aspirations. It's not just about qualifications, it's about the skills themselves. Now, I think a lot of us would say that both of those things are important. It is important that they get the qualifications, and that helps them. But it's also important that they have those skills to succeed, because we all know people who do get the qualifications and yet their careers don't really develop because they lack the other skills that are needed to be successful at work. So that's really what I want to talk about today, is how can you do both? How can you teach the English language program which they need, and also develop these skills which employers value to get a job and also to rise up in their career. Okay, so the first question is, well, what are the skills that employers really value? And here I want to share with you some research. This research comes from the National Association of Colleges Employers in the US, where they asked thousands of employers, what do they most value when they're looking at their staff and their recruits? And this is the top 10 in this order. Is first, their ability to work in a team structure. Then their ability to make decisions and solve problems, their ability to communicate verbally, their ability to plan, organize, and prioritize work, to obtain and process information, to analyze quantitative data, technical knowledge related to the job, proficiency with computers, ability to write reports, and the ability to sell and influence others. Now, when you look at that, what is interesting is that probably only number 7 is related to qualification. And when you look at the other areas, a lot of those are not part of the school or university curriculum. So here are skills that are important to employers, but not taught in the education system. So that's a challenge to us who work in education. How do we fill that gap between what employers want and what we are teaching our students? Let me share another piece of information. I just want to check that you can see me okay. I'm just checking for messages. So you can all hear me okay, can you? Good, good, good. And I'm just checking the comments section. If you have comments, you can put them in the comments section. And I may not see all of them, but I'll see some of them. I realized I didn't really say good evening at the beginning. So good evening if I forgot to say that. Okay, so coming back, I was going to give you some more information about how skills at work are changing. Now, this comes from a European research project where they looked at the advertisements for jobs across thousands of different job types to analyze how the skills are changing. And what they noticed is what they could see was that the kind of skills that are required of jobs now are much more non-routine jobs. So when it says non-routine interactive, that means with people. So working with other people in an unpredictable way. And non-routine analytic is thinking, calculating, analyzing skills, but not in a routine, regular way, not in a predictable way. Whereas the skills for manual and for cognitive routine activities, those are in decline. So if we're thinking about preparing our students for the future, we can't be thinking of just routine activities. We have to be thinking, how do we develop their ability to work with unpredictable, interactive, analytical situations? So in fact, there's lots of research into what employers want. And one of the things we did at Cambridge was to try and go through all that research and try and analyze what all these different bodies and organizations are saying. So there's British Council here, OECD, the World Economic Forum, City of London, a lot of different organizations. And we went through all their research to see what do employers think is most important. And actually, if you're interested in this, I can share that research with you. There's a URL there, and there's a QR code if you've got a camera, to take you to a summary of the research that we've done into what employers want from their employees, from their staff. And when we went through it, we kind of summarized and looked through what are the most important employability skills. And from all of this research, there were 20 things which were mentioned most frequently, from interpersonal skills to sales and marketing skills. Now, the slight problem with this list is quite a mixture of things. Some of them are almost personality traits like positive attitude, initiative, and some of them are quite specific technical skills like IT skills. So we looked at this and we analyzed it a bit further and put all the skills that they mentioned into 8 main groups. So we call these the employability competencies. These 8 areas: so collaboration, teamwork, communication skills, innovation and problem solving, critical thinking and decision making, leadership and global citizenship, personal development and management, emotional intelligence, and digital literacy. So we think these are the 8 main areas that most employers put most value on. And this is what we're looking at. How can we help with these particular skills? Whoops. So one of the questions people ask is, that these kinds of skills, are they teachable? Can we teach collaboration? Can we teach critical thinking or leadership? Or are these just personality traits? And in some ways, it's quite similar to teaching. I think most of us know that there are some people whose personality makes it easy for them to be good teachers. They've got the right communication skills, they've got the right outgoing nature, they're very empathetic. That makes them good teachers. But for other people who are maybe not naturally great teachers, they can still learn to be good teachers. And teacher training helps them to work out what are the skills, what are the techniques that they can use to become better teachers. And I think it's the same with these employability skills. Yes, there are some people who naturally, from their personality, from their upbringing, have an advantage. But everybody needs these skills. And so it is our role as educators to be helping all our students to develop these skills, and particularly the ones who are struggling. Now, the way that we try to help people is we feel there are 3 steps to this. As a teacher, first of all, you need to be able to understand, well, what are these skills? What do they really mean? When we say collaboration, well, what does that really involve? What am I really trying to develop for my students? Second thing is you want to look for opportunities within the class, within your lessons to do this. So we're not looking to add extra lessons, but we're looking at the current lessons and thinking, are there opportunities to develop critical thinking or leadership or emotional management? Are there opportunities for that within our own lessons and classes? And then when we find those opportunities, we look for ways that we can actually develop their skills. How can we help our students and support them to develop those skills? So that's what we're going to do. Now, so the first thing I'm going to look at now is the understanding. How can we understand better the skills? And the way that we've done this is we've taken those 8 employability competencies skills, and then we've broken them down into the core areas within each one. And then within each core area, we've analyzed the component skills. And by looking at the core areas and component skills, you as a teacher can see, this is what I need to develop in my students. This is what they need to be able to do to be creative. And that will help you to make decisions about what to focus on in your classes. So let me give you an example. So one of the areas is collaboration and teamwork. And what you can see is in the second column there are the 3 core areas. So to be good at collaboration teamwork, you need to be able to work well together in a group. And you need to be able to manage collaborative tasks and projects. And you need to be able to deliver a group task effectively with the emphasis on the word deliver, get it done. But then what do those mean? Well, if we look at working well together in a group, what does that really mean? There are 3 component skills. You need to establish ways of working together. You need to respond constructively to others, and you need to support others in their tasks. So if you can help your students with those component skills, then you're helping them to become better at working in a group, and that's helping their collaboration skills. Let's look at another example. This is innovation and problem solving. Maybe I'll give you a few seconds just to read through the different core areas and component skills. So again, here, when people say, what is innovation? Well, there are different aspects to it. You have to develop this creative mindset. You have to be able to generate ideas, and you also have to be good at implementing ideas to solve problems. And how do we develop the skill of generating ideas? Well, it's partly about generating multiple ideas. So your students need to be good at brainstorming, for example. They need to elaborate and combine ideas from others. So it's not just your own ideas. You need to listen to others and elaborate, combine them. And then also there's the skill of developing alternative scenarios. What if? Imagine if we could do this, and develop proposals. That's part of generating ideas. And let's look at one other area, third area. This is leadership and global citizenship. And here, well, what does that mean? Well, there's 3 areas: contributing to the success of an organization, demonstrating leadership, and contributing to an organization's positive role in global issues. And then we can take each of those and look at it. So demonstrating leadership, taking the initiative to address issues and pursue opportunities, managing groups of people through clear and practical techniques, taking a strategic approach, and generating support for action. So those are the component skills that are needed. And that's what we want to develop in our students. So I hope this is all clear. And all this information, I know it's a lot of information that's coming at you, but we've put it all together into a single framework. We call it the Cambridge Employability Skills Framework. And there's a booklet which has all this information. So you can access that if you go to this URL, Maybe just copy it now rather than going now to it. But if you take a picture of that, and then later you can access this document, which gives you the skills framework, which describes all the different employability skills. Okay, so that's the understanding part of the thing. Now, does anybody know this? Here's a map of a city. Anybody recognize the map? I don't know if you are you used to using the comments section on StreamYard. If you want to put answers into the or comments into the comment section, you can do that. Maybe there's a delay on this. I know sometimes the comment section doesn't come through immediately. But I think a lot of you will recognize that this map, or some of you will recognize that this is a map of London. And the reason I'm showing you this map is that this is a tourist map. And on this tourist map, there are 20 places, I think, or 20 plus places which they show, which you are good to visit, must see things. Now, imagine you are visiting London and you only have 2 days. And you can't see 20 things in 2 days. So do you panic? Do you say, oh my God, I can't go and see 20 things in 2 days. This is a disaster. It's impossible. No, you don't say that. What you say is, I've only got 2 days. I can only see 3 or 4 things. So let me choose the 3 or 4 things which are most interesting to me, and I'll choose those. So the purpose of the map is not to say you have to visit everything, but is to help you to choose which things to see. Now, the reason I'm saying this analogy is because it's similar to the framework of skills, of employability skills. When we say your students need all these skills, we know that you can't teach them all because you don't have enough time. So it's really a map which says these are all the skills that you could teach. And it's for you to decide how much time you've got and what are the most important ones for you to teach. So one of the things that you will need to do, and it's great if you can do it as a college or as a group of teachers together, is to decide which of these skills are most useful, most important for your students, and which ones do you want to concentrate on developing in your particular program or your group of students. Okay, is everybody with me so far? Yes. Okay, so I'm catching up now on comments, and I can see, yes, Sampat spotted London, and good. So everything seems fine. So next thing I want to talk about is what are the opportunities that you can find to develop these skills? Because I don't think you want to have a separate class about employability skills. You want to develop them at the same time as teaching English. Here's an example. This comes from a Cambridge textbook called Talent, but you might be using a different textbook, or you might be using materials from online, wherever they are. I think you'll understand the idea. In this particular case, the students are going to listen to a discussion between 2 people who are talking about whether it's better to live in the countryside or better to live in the town. So they're going to listen to the discussion. One person has one point of view and the other has another point of view. So when you have that situation, obviously the purpose of this listening exercise is to practice English, to listen and to understand. Maybe there's some vocabulary, just pronunciation. So that's all about developing English language skills. But it's also an opportunity to think about collaboration skills. Because when you have a discussion like this, people need to be listening to the other person respectfully and responding constructively to the other person's contributions. That's an important collaboration skill. So maybe we can develop this at the same time as the listening practice. So we can think about, when we can listen to the dialogue, and we can think about, well, what is useful language for responding constructively to others' contributions. And we can think, well, what is a positive response to somebody else speaking? Well, it might be to build on their ideas, to acknowledge their point of view, perhaps to suggest alternatives, or to politely interrupt if you're short of time in a discussion. Sometimes if you want to disagree with someone, a polite way of doing it is to acknowledge what they have said, but then to suggest an alternative. So what are the phrases in English that you might use to do these things? For example, to build on others' ideas, you might use a phrase like, yes, and another thing is, or yes, that's true, and I also think. So when you're teaching these phrases, you're helping them to do the action of building on others' ideas. Similarly, acknowledge others' points of view. Yes, that's a good point. Yes, I can see what you're saying. What about suggest alternatives? If we were speaking face to face, I would be asking you to shout out answers to these, to make some suggestions of good English phrases for doing these things. I think there's a slight delay on the comments, so I won't wait for you to write anything in the comments. But if you have any ideas, do feel free to do that. So alternatives, have you thought about ... Or another idea could be ... What about if you're running out of time, you want to interrupt someone? Okay, shall we move on? We've only 10 minutes. Can we look at the next point? So phrasing the interruption as a question always gives it more politeness, of course. So what you're doing here is helping your students with their English by their learning these phrases, but you're also helping them to think about how they can respond constructively to what other people are saying in the group. So you're developing both the language and the employability skills at the same time. Now, if we had more time, if we were in face-to-face, I would ask you to use these phrases in a discussion with the person next to you. And I've got a discussion topic for you, but it doesn't really work online. So we'll save that for another time. Okay, here's another example. In this case, it's a reading exercise, and it's a topic about the crazy things that people do with their pets. I don't know if it's the same in India. Are people going a bit crazy with their pets? They may be, but certainly in the UK, sometimes, and in the US, it can be a little bit mad. And so this is an argument this is listening. People are debating about whether people are going too far. Now, again, it's a listening exercise. It's about practicing their English. So they're listening and trying to understand the English. But instead of being multiple choice questions or comprehension questions, what the task is asking them to do is to listen for examples that support their arguments. So Kinan and Lucia have different points of view, and they each use different examples. And they use different phrases to introduce that. So I like this exercise because it's not just about comprehension, it's also focusing on the fact that the power of an argument is often dependent on how good the examples are. And so when you are thinking critically, you are evaluating the examples. Part of the evaluation is, well, look at the examples. How convincing are those arguments? And so here again, I think it's a way of combining both the language practice and the ability to think critically of arguments and to weigh up and evaluate arguments. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to mention is about working together in groups. Now, sometimes this works really well with groups of students. Sometimes it can be hard work. It can depend on your students. It can depend on what the normal activity is in your college, for example. So this here, all I've put here is that one of a good way of getting students to work together well is to have a particular approach, a particular routine that you go through, and generally this kind of approach I think is quite effective. But first of all, you have to think about how you're going to group them. You have to keep checking instructions that they've understood the instructions, because usually group work fails because students have forgotten what the instructions were in the first place. Then if you're using the group work to practice language points, just to check that they know what those language points are. Check the roles, and I'll come to that in a minute. Set time limits, and then get each group to present results. So that's a kind of routine for, if students get used to that, then they can become quite effective and skilled at working in groups. Now, I mentioned about roles, and I think this can be really important to make group work and collaboration effective, is to think about what the different roles in a group are. And personally, I quite like to do this if some students are not used to working in groups, is to do a little exercise just to get them to match the different roles with what their responsibilities are. And I'm sure you could go through this. Checker is D, organizer is E, and note taker is C, timekeeper A, presenter B. So you get your students to go through this, and then you, I think to begin with, you as a teacher have to assign the roles, and only when they've started to understand the roles better that they can actually start choosing them. And it's a way of getting some of the quieter students to have more engagement with the task. I think it's also very good to, at the end of any group work, is to have a bit of reflection on how well the group work worked, so that they realize that that's an important part of the lesson, is being good at working in a group. And so asking them, having a quick check of some sort, however you do this, whether it's online or on the board. Did you use the phrases for disagreeing respectfully? This is an example of a group work which involves where you've been teaching this. Did everyone in your group contribute to the discussion? Did everyone agree with the result? Was it a good discussion? So just asking these questions makes students reflect on how good they are at working in a group. The other thing to think about is that you want to develop your students' ability to take control, to think about what they want to achieve. Now, because they're in education, they're thinking about what they're going to learn. But even in the workplace, people have to think about how are they going to develop? What are they developing? And so making students not just dependent on you as a teacher, but for them to think about how they can improve themselves is an important skill. So what can you do to help your students think about what they're going to learn? I mean, one thing you can do that people do is they have a little checklist, and at the beginning of the lesson, they have the learning objectives that they put here, and they ask the students to say how much they want each of those skills. So one of the skills might be, I can talk easily about illness and medicine. Is that a skill that's important to the students? And then at the end of the lesson, to ask them, well, how well did you do at those particular skills? So it's the beginning and end of the lesson is helping them to think about what they want to do and how well they did it. And also it's really good for them to be reflecting on learning strategies. There's a little example here I've taken from a course book which is about which is looking at vocabulary learning. And so you as an English teacher, you need to help them to develop vocabulary. There's a nice little thing with spidergrams. I don't know if you use spidergrams, but they're quite good with vocabulary. So you can put a word in the middle of the spider, and then they have to think of other words which relate to that word in the spider in the middle. And that's just a way of thinking about vocabulary. And in this particular exercise, the students then put their hand over the word in the middle and then show it to other students and ask them to guess what is the word in the middle just by looking at the associated words on the outside. So it's just like a little game. But this way of using spidergrams to understand words is quite effective. And again, I'm taking this idea from another teacher who I saw do this, that they would ask their students at the beginning of the term or semester, how do you improve your vocab learning? And they had 4 different approaches, and they asked the students to think each individually, what are they good at, what are they not very good at. So these are 4 strategies. And then at the end of the semester or term, they would ask them to evaluate again their vocabulary learning strategies. And you don't need to collect that information back. It's just to make them think about, well, what are my strategies? What are my strategies? What am I doing to help learn vocabulary? So it's trying to give them the responsibility and to build a sense of responsibility and ownership of their own development. Okay, so now I want to give another example. This is an example of combining things. So in this particular case, it's combining the development of critical thinking and collaboration. So a task which requires them to collaborate and to think critically. And also to engage with other students in a respectful way. And in this particular task, well, this is a task which I'm mentioning, which comes from one of our course books called Unlock. It's a very nice activity. It's a project, and they have to imagine themselves in a situation where they're making a decision about which students will get a scholarship to study at a UK university. So they are the trustees of the scholarship, and they need to evaluate the different applications. And this is something which a lot of students can identify with. They understand the situation, the context, and they're interested in it. But one of the things it requires of them is it requires critical thinking skills. It needs them to have decision criteria. To how are they going to what are the criteria for making the decision? Now, do your students understand that? Do they understand that they need to make those decision criteria? And do they need any phrases in English to talk about this? So you might think about something else which requires job criteria. In this case, for example, in the course book, we look at choosing a job. So if you're choosing a job, what job would you like? You have to have a set of criteria for that. And you need to evaluate which are the most important and which are not so important for you. So the students can think about these criteria, and they can evaluate them, put a weight to them, and then they can compare their own choices with other students' choices. And when you're doing this, of course, they're practicing their English. This is developing their vocabulary and their confidence in speaking and their clarity of speaking, their ability to interact. So that's all language skills. But at the same time, they're also learning, yes, in making decisions, I need to think about what are the criteria that are going to guide that decision. Okay, and the phrases that you might teach them, like, I think it's really important that, or I don't mind if it, what I don't want is. So this again is using language to support the development of the critical thinking. Then you also want them to be able to agree and disagree respectfully. So what do you think they need to learn or practice to do this better when you think of your students? Well, one of the things you might think about is what is the language that they need to sound more respectful when they agree or disagree? And one of the ways you do that is using modal verbs. I can see that it may not be the ideal course for you. Or using apologies. Sorry, but I have to disagree. Or saying that you recognize someone's point and then adding but. Yes, but. So these are ways of disagreeing in a respectful way. And then you can, in this particular course book, you can we give them a selection of phrases, and they have to decide which ones are agreeing, disagreeing, and which ones are formal and which ones are more informal. So something like, I can see what you're saying, but it's disagreeing, and it's quite a formal phrase. Whereas number 5, no way, is very informal and wouldn't be appropriate in a more formal situation. So I think it's useful for teaching the language, but also making them sensitive to what is appropriate for different contexts. Then maybe you want to get them to practice the language. And so in this particular case, we give them an exercise where student A, and they work in pairs, student A have certain particular statements which they need to kind of argue for, and the other students need to respond to that. And it's just a little exercise to get them to practice disagreeing or agreeing in an appropriate way. And of course, one of the important things about appropriate and respect in language is through the pronunciation, the way that you use intonation. And we know that if you sound a little uncertain, that sounds more respectful in the way that you are speaking. So being able to get the right intonation to sound respectful is something that you can teach them as part of a language program. And then, so the next stage we would take that maybe this is in this scenario of people applying for a scholarship, that those particular students are studying different subjects, hotel management, medicine, law, and you can get your students to practice everything they've learned about agreement and disagreement by discussing which one of these is most important to support. Okay, and even when you're talking about how to make a decision, again, there's an opportunity there to be teaching the phrasing, the language around that, but at the same time, you're also teaching them the skill of compromising in order to reach a final decision. Okay, so again, I think one of the best ways of developing language skills and employability skills at the same time is a project-based approach. And I'm not sure how often you do this, but it's a really effective way of teaching. When we teach a language, of course, we're very conscious that we want to teach the knowledge of language, the rules, the grammar, the vocabulary. But language is so much a practiced activity that you have to be giving your students opportunities to practice using the language in a situation which is meaningful. And projects are a great way of doing that. And this is an example. I'm just giving you an example here. This is a project that we sometimes ask students to do, that they have to pitch an idea for a new health product or a program. And this combines different skills which are really important for employability. So it requires them to use creative thinking in coming up with the content. It requires them to use critical thinking, to use group work, to use communication skills, and also personal development. So I'll just show you a little bit what I mean. So in order to come up with the ideas, you want to help them in some way. And you might use, in this particular case, we use mind maps as a way of thinking of new ideas and being imaginative. And you might use that similar technique to help your students to become more creative in thinking of content for this particular project. This project, they're trying to think of a health-related program that they're going to sell. Then critical thinking, and that's about structuring the presentation. In this particular case, what we do is we give them an example of a good presentation. And then we ask them to analyze that presentation. What are the different techniques that they use in the presentation in order to make it effective? And so by analyzing the structure of that, they're then able to structure their own pitch, their own presentation that they're going to give for their project health program. Of course, they have to work together to produce the ideas, the program, the pitch, the presentation. So in that sense, they're having to agree and disagree. So they're practicing their collaboration skills. Then they need to present their ideas, their plan, their proposal at the end. So they're practicing their communication skills. And then at the end, it's good if you ask them to reflect on what they have done well in the project. Have they used the language? Have they effectively got their meaning across? Were they persuasive? So this is helping them to think about what they're learning. And that's part of personal development. So to sum up, if we want to help our students to develop these employability skills, and we are English language teachers, the first step is to understand what those skills really are. So at the beginning, I showed you the Cambridge Employability Skills Framework. I gave you a link to that. And so you can look at that and you can think about what do these skills really mean. The second step is to decide what your priorities are. So what you think your students really need. And as I said, it's great if you can do that as a group of teachers, as a community of teachers, as a college. The third thing is to think about how do you integrate that into the English program. So you might say that, in the first year, we're going to concentrate on collaboration skills. In the second year, we're going to focus more on critical thinking or some approach like that. And then you're looking for the opportunities in each lesson. So you're not having new lessons just about these. You're looking at the existing lessons and thinking, how can we extend this lesson and focus on the aspects of this lesson which relate to the employability skills that matter to us. And then finally is to look at projects which combine the different skills into one whole project. So I think what you would be looking for, what would be great, is that as a college, if you were able to say, in this first term or this first year, we're going to focus on collaboration skills. And by the end of it, we want everybody to be really good at working in groups, to understand what the different roles are, to know how to agree and disagree, how to bring in other students who are quiet. So that's our objective, that's our goal for the college for that first semester or first year. And then in the next part of the program, we're going to focus on, for example, creativity. How can we help students to think of new ideas, to find alternatives, to think of ways of solving problems, identifying problems and how they would solve them. So in that way, you can develop an employability skills curriculum or plan or syllabus, which you are integrating with your English language program. So I think that's really everything that I wanted to talk to you about. And so now I'm going to turn to you to ask if you've got any questions. There's a nice quote I like: education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And I'm sure that's your experience as well. So now I'm going to look at the chat, the comments section, and see if there are any questions that you have. Hopefully you found it useful. And so thank you. Some very nice comments in there, which is great to see. I'm glad you found it useful and informative. Okay, so questions. Can we watch this again whenever we need? So I think so, but you may need to check with Dr. Radhika that's the way it's done. But I think this will be on YouTube and Facebook, and so you can. Next question is from Ram Kumar Rakesh. What is the role of interpersonal skills in embedding employability skills among students? Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think behind that question is perhaps the interpersonal skills between the teacher and the students, and also between the students. But particularly, I think one of the challenges of developing employability skills is, you as a teacher, do you feel confident that you have those skills? And you want to help your students to be collaborative, but have you got those skills to help them develop that? And I know a number of schools who have said employability, or colleges, it's really important to them, and they have had CPD, professional development sessions, where they've tried to think about how they can improve their own skills as well as their student skills. But I think by interpersonal skills, of course, it depends a little bit what you mean by that. But for me, part of interpersonal skills is being able to understand your students and being able to think about how you can motivate them to do things. And I think that's such an important skill as a teacher, and being able to do that when you're focused on employability, I think is critical. I might be missing questions because they're coming quickly now. Is native accent important? No, I don't think so. Not at all. I'm sure you know that the majority of people who speak English in the world are speaking to other people whose language is not English. First language is not English. So most people are, Japanese speaking to Brazilians, Italians speaking to Kenyans. So most people are speaking in an accent which is not a native speaker accent. So that's not the important thing. The important thing with accent is comprehensibility, intelligibility. So it's being able to be understood is the only thing that's important, I think, in my opinion. What are the jobs available in the UK for students who do English literature in England? So if you if you're trying to use an English literature qualification to work elsewhere, then obviously I think you're going to be talking about communication skills. So people obviously who work in communication, advertising, marketing, those are nice things. People who write reports, and people and management. I think one of the great things about English literature is that it's about understanding people, and people's motivations. So I think it makes you a great manager if you are an English literature student.
Dr. Knight, we are, Dr. Hari, you have a question for him?
Sorry.
He,
Yeah, it is a very insightful talk, Dr. Ben. As we know, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and the ground rules have changed a lot. I mean, education is going through drastic changes. So, what do you think would be the future? I mean, what kind of skills should we focus in the future? I mean, in terms of employability.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the skills we've talked about still apply, but I do think there are some new things which have become more important as a result of the pandemic. So the pandemic, obviously there's been a lot of lockdowns, and I'm sure it's the same in India, that more people are working from home. People are having to work more independently. So I think something which is new is the ability to work independently, to take responsibility for your work, and to feel in control of your work. So there are always people at work who depend on their manager to tell them what to do. And that may be okay when you are in the office or working together in the workplace. But when we're working from home, that's not very good. So I think one of the new employability skills will be independence and self-responsibility.
So, can we bring that in the online classroom context? I mean, the skills that you talked about and the pedagogy that I mean related to that. Can we bring it in the context of an online classroom?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the, again, what a lot of teachers have discovered, I think, is that their students are not very good at managing their own learning.
Yeah.
When they're in the classroom, the teacher is managing a lot of the learning, and they perhaps didn't realize that the students weren't very good at managing their own learning. But with online learning, we're discovering that some of them don't have the skills to manage their own learning. And so I think that has become an important part of teaching online now, is how can you get your students to become more autonomous as learners, more independent as learners. And I mean, that's a big subject, but I think the ways that we introduce choices and introduce responsibility for our students to take on has to be very step by step. We can't just throw them in the deep end and hope that they take responsibility. We need to work out little bits of areas where we can give them responsibility and slowly build up that skill of working independently. In a pandemic, it's an emergency and nothing is controlled.
We
But
have.
in the future, we will try to, I think, develop that skill more gradually.
Thank you so much.
Very important questions.
Like I could see one question, Dr. Knight. Like, what is the role of interpersonal skills?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one I was trying to answer before. And it's a little bit open because it depends a little bit what you mean by interpersonal skills. But I think usually people mean that ability to work well with other people. And I think that I don't, if you remember, the research into employability skills, employee skills, number one was working with other people, was interpersonal skills. So if you are an employer, this is one of your biggest concerns, is that can my workforce work effectively together? And I think us as teachers, it's our responsibility to make our students good at working together.
Thank you so much. I think, do you have any questions, Dr. Harley?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So I think we have come to the end of this session, and thank you so much, Dr. Hari and Dr. Knight. Like, we often struggle uh, to make the students employable, to satisfy the expectations of the industry. So this, I hope most of the participants will agree with me, because the situation is demanding the placements and all those things, because the gap between the college level students and the industry expectations are still there. So I hope you have means I hope everyone will accept that, and you have given a clear idea of how to integrate employability skills in English classroom especially. So even though we are aware of teaching skills like collaboration, teamwork, compromising, and etc., but how to place them, where to place them is very important. So you have taught us, or you have given an insight on that. Thank you so much, Dr. Knight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for listening.
And on behalf of School of English, I thank the management of Kumilaguru Institutions, principal, the faculty of the department, the tech support team, Dr. Leo Gertrude, the lead of visual communication department, for the continuous support in organizing this session. And on behalf of Kumalaguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, I thank Dr. Knight once again, and all the participants for joining this session. You can always visit our website to get to know more about such events that is happening in our campus. And you can watch the live sessions happening in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Also, you can find these things. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you. I want you all to fill that feedback form, which is posted in the chat box.